Belgium. Land of historic cities, land of medieval squares, land of canals and golden countryside. A thin mist drifts over rooftops worn by time. Ancient bell towers rise toward the sky. Calm rivers wind through lush green countryside. Welcome to Belgium. Welcome to one of the smallest countries in Europe. Known for its artistic heritage, this is a country where Flanders meets Wallonia, where cities are born between art and chocolate, and where Europe gathers to decide its own future. But let's start from the beginning. Belgium sits in the heart of Western Europe, small but strategic, with just 30,689 square kilometers, or about 11,849 square miles, home to over 11 million souls. It is a country that is divided into 3 distinct geographical regions. There is the coastal plain of low-lying Flanders, stretching flat toward the North Sea. Then there is the Central Plateau, the beating heart of the nation. And finally, there is the highland of the Ardennes in the southeast, where the land rises, reaching its highest point at just 694 meters, or about 2,277 feet, with the Signal de Botringe. Belgium, in fact, is one of the flattest countries in Europe, a true land where horizontality dominates the landscape. Its coastline stretches for just 65 kilometers, or about 40 miles along the North Sea, and it is completely flat, sandy, and free of any dramatic cliffs. And just like its Dutch neighbors, parts of Flanders are lands reclaimed from the sea, drained and wrestled from the waters, witnesses to humanity's determination to reshape nature. The Belgian sky is often gray, generous with rain for about 200 days a year, and with mild temperatures that rarely give in to climatic extremes. It is a climate without surprises that permeates everything, with a humidity that seeps into your bones and into the ancient stones of the cities. Despite its small size, it is also one of the most densely populated and urbanized countries in Europe, with much of its territory either built upon or cultivated. Between Antwerp, Brussels, and Ghent, an almost continuous urban network stretches out. And only in the Ardennes, to the south, does nature still preserve its wild spaces, with dense forests that breathe, far from the concrete and the asphalt. In this relatively small theater, 3 languages coexist together: There is Dutch in Flanders, French in Wallonia, and German in a small eastern community. Even Brussels, the capital, is officially bilingual with French and Dutch, a reflection of the cultural complexity that defines this nation. And speaking of Brussels, this city is not just the capital of Belgium, but has become the capital of Europe itself, where agreements are woven that cross borders and cultures. Here, in fact, you will find the European Parliament, the European Commission, and the headquarters of NATO. Moving on, Belgium is the country with the most chocolatiers per capita in the world, with over 2,000 chocolate shops, producing around 220,000 metric tons, or about 243,000 short tons of chocolate every year. Every square and every street corner smells of handcrafted cocoa. And then there is the beer. With over 1,500 varieties, Belgium holds a world record. And its brewing tradition is so precious that UNESCO recognized it as an intangible cultural heritage in 2016. To wrap up, another fun fact involves French fries. Despite their misleading name, the truth is that French fries were actually born here, right here in Belgium in the 17th century. A humble yet brilliant invention that from these lands has conquered the entire planet. Belgium, therefore, is much more than a small country. It is a place that has turned its modest size into strength, its density into vitality, and its rain into lush green landscapes. But now let's go discover the most incredible and iconic places of this nation. Bruges. A city that owes everything to water. In the Middle Ages, its canals connected it directly to the North Sea, turning it into one of the wealthiest trading ports in Europe. Then the Zwin River silted up, the port died, and the city froze in time. It was precisely this decline, in fact, that saved it, because no one had any reason to demolish or rebuild anything. The old town has remained intact since the 15th century. You will find red brick facades, arched bridges, and the belfry, which is the civic tower standing 83 meters, or about 272 feet tall, from which trade was monitored and fires were spotted. Today, walking along the canals means crossing a medieval city that has never stopped functioning. The old warehouses have also become museums, and the artisan shops now sell Belgian chocolate, which here has a tradition stretching back centuries. Ardennes. In the south of Belgium, the landscape changes dramatically. The Ardennes are an ancient plateau covered in dense forests, deep gorges, and rivers that have carved through rock for millions of years. This isolated territory, difficult to cross, made it a natural battlefield. In fact, it was here that in 1944, the Battle of the Bulge was fought, the last major German offensive of the Second World War. The marks of that conflict can still be found everywhere, among monuments, cemeteries, and war museums. But outside the inhabited areas, the woods dominate, along with the hiking trails and a rare quietness in such a densely populated country. Brussels. It's a city that shouldn't work, yet it does. It is the capital of Belgium. It is the seat of the European Union and NATO. It is also divided between French-speaking and Flemish communities, with an architecture that blends Art Nouveau palaces, medieval buildings, and concrete blocks from the 1960s. On paper, it is an institutional mess. In reality, it works. And this chaos is its character. The Grand Place, which is the central square, is considered one of the most spectacular in Europe, surrounded by 17th century guild buildings covered in gold. Just a few steps away, you will find the Mannequin Peas, the small statue of a boy urinating, a symbol of the irreverent humor of the people of Brussels. Dinant. A vertical cliff, roughly 100 meters or about 330 feet high. At the base, squeezed between the rock and the Meuse River, there is a row of colorful houses. At the top, instead, a fortified citadel that since 1050 has controlled the river passage. Dinant exists precisely because of its location. The river was a crucial trade route, and whoever controlled this narrow point controlled the traffic between France and Flanders. The Collegiate Church of Notre Dame, with its onion-shaped bell tower, fits directly into the rock wall. Here, Adolphe Sax was also born, the inventor of the saxophone, and the city remembers him with sculptures of the instrument scattered along the streets. Ghent. This city had the courage not to choose between past and present. In the Middle Ages, it was the second largest city in Europe after Paris, enriched by the textile industry and by the English wool that arrived through its three rivers. The Gravenstein, which is the castle of the Counts of Flanders built in 1180, still stands in the center, surrounded by water. But alongside the Gothic churches and medieval warehouses, Ghent has developed a powerful youth culture. It is a university city with a music and art scene among the liveliest in Belgium. The Graasley waterfront is the ancient port, and it is the point where these two souls meet. Here, you will find 13th century facades with bars and venues that stay open until late at night. Liège. A city that wasn't built by chance. It sits at the confluence of the Meuse and Ourthe rivers, and this crossroads of water for centuries meant one thing only: trade. From here, coal and steel departed toward all of Europe, and the city grew around its heavy industries. Then, when the mines closed, the city reinvented itself. The train station, designed by Calatrava, has become the symbol of this transformation. And it is a cathedral of glass and white steel that connects the old city to the future. There is also the Montagne de Buren, which is a staircase of 374 steps, leading from the center up to the citadel, and from up there, you can see how the river has shaped every street. Antwerp. A diamond does not shine on its own, but someone has to cut it. And in Antwerp, they have been doing it for 500 years. "80% of the world's rough diamonds pass through here, in the district near the central station, where hundreds of workshops cut them by hand. But the city does not live on precious stones alone. port is the second largest in Europe, and this wealth has funded centuries of art. The old town revolves around the Grote Markt and the Cathedral of Our Lady, whose tower at 123 meters, or about 404 feet, dominates the skyline. Today, the former port area houses the Mass, a museum that traces how maritime trade has shaped the city's identity. Durbuy. It proudly calls itself the smallest city in the world. In reality, this is a historical title, tied to medieval rights, when this place held the legal status of a city, but had the dimensions of a village. Even today, though, the city has only a few hundred residents, packed into a handful of stone houses along a bend in the Orthe River. The Ardennes surround everything, with their forests and rock formations. The castle overlooking the center dates back to the 11th century, and since then, no one has had any reason to expand the village beyond its natural perimeter. The result is a town that seems frozen in time, protected by the geography itself. Ypres. This city was leveled to the ground, completely. During the First World War, it sat at the center of the Western Front, and 4 years of bombardment reduced it to rubble. Then, something rare happened. The Belgians rebuilt it identically, stone by stone, using photographs and archival drawings. And today, it is nearly impossible to tell. The old town has brick facades, wide squares, and the Cloth Hall, which is the ancient textile market stretching 125 meters, or about 410 feet long, that today houses a museum dedicated to the war. Around the city, the countryside of West Flanders is flat and agricultural, dotted with over 150 military cemeteries that remind us of how much this reconstruction cost. Zwin Nature Reserve. Where Belgium ends and the North Sea begins, salt water enters the land twice a day. The Zwin is a tidal flat, meaning an environment where the distinction between sea and land does not truly exist. tides carry sediments and nutrients that feed low-growing vegetation resistant to salt. And this vegetation attracts thousands of migratory birds, such as storks, spoonbills, and avocets, that use the Zwin as a stopover along the routes between Africa and Scandinavia. Once here stood the port that made Bruges rich, but then the sea retreated, the port disappeared, and nature reclaimed everything. Namur. Two rivers meet here. The Sambre flows into the Meuse, and right on that rocky spur between the two waters, about 2,000 years ago, someone built a fortress. Since then, every army that has crossed Belgium has wanted this city. Spaniards, French, Dutch, Germans, all of them fought to control that strategic point. The citadel that today overlooks the city is the result of centuries of sieges and reconstructions, layer upon layer, wall upon wall. Below it, Namur sits peacefully along the rivers, with its cafes, its narrow streets, and a pace of life that has nothing military about it. Leuven. "30,000 students in a city of 100,000 residents." That single fact explains everything. Leuven revolves around its university, founded in 1425, and it is one of the oldest in Europe. For centuries, academic life has shaped every corner. For example, the university library, destroyed twice during the World Wars, was rebuilt each time because without it, the city lost its meaning. The Grootmarkt, which is the central square, is dominated by the Gothic town hall, with 236 statues set into the niches of its facade. But just walk a bit through the center, and you will find breweries, pubs, and that chaotic energy that only university cities know how to produce. Knokke. Belgium has 67 kilometers, or about 42 miles of coastline. And this town sits right at the eastern end of this short coastal strip at the border with the Netherlands. Here the beach is wide, windy, and beaten by the currents of the North Sea. In the 20th century, the wealthy families of Brussels and Antwerp began building villas and summer residences here, and Knokke became the seaside resort of the Belgian upper class. Art galleries, restaurants, and design shops line the main street. But just head toward the Zwin Nature Reserve, and you will find wild dunes and salt marshes where the only presence is that of migratory birds. Atomium. It was supposed to stand for 6 months, but it is still there after nearly 70 years. The Atomium was built for the 1958 World Expo in Brussels. It stands 102 meters, or about 335 feet tall, and represented the faith in science and in the atomic energy of the post-war era. It consists of 9 steel spheres connected to each other to form an iron crystal and magnified 165 billion times. Inside the spheres, there are escalators and elevators that take you up to the top sphere, from which you can see the entire city. No one has ever had the courage to demolish it, and over time, it has become the symbol of Brussels. Abbey of Villers. It was founded by Cistercian monks in 1146 in an isolated valley of the Ardennes. For 600 years, they cultivated the land here, brewed beer, and built cloisters and a church, stretching 90 meters or about 295 feet long. Then the French Revolution drove the monks out, and without maintenance, the roofs collapsed, the walls cracked open, and trees took the place of the naves. Today, the ruins are among the most evocative in Belgium. There are Gothic arches without roofs, columns wrapped in ivy, and floors covered in grass. The silence by now is truly mystical in this place. Mechelen. Between Brussels and Antwerp, there is a city that everyone passes through, but without stopping. And that is a big mistake. Mechelen, in fact, in the 16th century was the capital of the Low Countries, under Margaret of Austria. The Cathedral of St. Rumbold was supposed to have a tower reaching 167 meters, or about 548 feet, but construction stopped at 97 meters, or about 318 feet, and that unfinished stump has become the unmistakable profile of the city. The city is also recognized as the capital of bells, because here they teach the art of the carillon, which is the instrument that plays bells from a keyboard. It is also home to the only royal carillon school in the world. La Roche-en-Ardenne. The River flows at the bottom of a narrow valley, and the small town clings to the slopes as best it can. There is no room to expand because the wooded hills close in on everything. At the top, the ruins of an 11th century castle remind us that this passage through the Ardennes was defended to stop the German advance. Rebuilt after the war, today it is a small gem of the Ardennes, with its stone houses overlooking the valley, cafes along the river, and an atmosphere that in autumn becomes almost fairy tale-like. Tournai. Few Belgian cities can claim to be older than Rome, and Tournai nearly can. Founded by the Romans under the name Turnicum, in the 5th century it became the first capital of the Franks. But beyond history, this is a vibrant city. The Scheldt River cuts the center in two, with medieval bridges and a waterfront, where cafes and shops cluster together. The Cathedral of Notre Dame, with its 5 towers, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The center is compact and walkable. There are wide squares and gray stone facades that give the city a sober character, quite different from the colorful Flanders further north. Damme. Five kilometers, or about 3 miles, separate Damme from Bruges. And a straight canal lined with poplar trees connects the two towns. In the Middle Ages, that canal was the reason for everything. Damme, in fact, served as the outer port of Bruges, meaning it was the point where ships unloaded their goods before continuing inland. But when the port silted up, trade ended and Damme emptied out. Only a few hundred residents remained, a church far too large for the village, and a Gothic town hall designed for a city that never came to be. Today you can reach it by bicycle from Bruges, along that canal that once carried fortunes. Spa-Francorchamps. For those who love motorsport, this name means one thing only: the most technical circuit in Formula One. Built in 1921 on public roads among the hills of the Ardennes, it stretches for 7 kilometers, or about 4.3 miles of curves, that follow the natural contour of the terrain, with elevation changes of over 100 meters, or about 330 feet. Eau Rouge is a lightning-fast S-curve on a downhill stretch, and it is the point where you can tell who truly knows how to drive. The weather, however, can change in a matter of minutes. It is this mix of technique, terrain, and unpredictability that makes Francorchamps different from any other circuit in the world. Gaasbeek Castle. Just 15 minutes from Brussels, the landscape changes completely. No more concrete or city, but fields, orchards, and gentle rolling hills. At the center of this agricultural area stands Gaasbeek Castle, built in 1236 as a defensive fortress. Over the centuries, it evolved from a military stronghold to an aristocratic residence, and the interiors still hold tapestries, suits of armor, and original furnishings. The historic garden follows a Renaissance design with precise geometric patterns that contrast with the open countryside all around. Tongeren. It is the oldest city in Belgium. Not as a figure of speech, but because the Romans founded it in the 1st century BC. And a section of the Roman walls from the 2nd century is still standing. Every Sunday morning, the center fills up with one of the largest antique markets in Europe, with over 350 vendors lining the streets. There is also the Basilica of Our Lady in the Gothic style, which holds a treasure of sacred art accumulated over 700 years. Lion's Mound. An artificial mound of earth, 43 meters, or about 141 feet high, in the middle of the Belgian plain. On top, an iron lion weighing 28 metric tons, or about 31 short tons. It marks the spot where on June 18, 1815, Napoleon lost everything. The mound was built 3 years after the battle, using soil gathered from the battlefield itself, and it takes 226 steps to climb to the top. From up there, you can see the terrain exactly as the general saw it, flat, open, with no shelter. And you begin to understand why in just a few hours, nearly 50,000 soldiers died. Kalmthout Heath. 6,000 hectares, or about 15,000 acres of heathland, meaning open terrain covered with heather and sand, on the border between Belgium and the Netherlands. It is one of the last landscapes of this kind still surviving in Flanders. The sandy, nutrient-poor soil made agriculture impossible, and precisely for this reason, nature was left untouched. Between August and September, the heather blooms and the heath turns violet. The rest of the year, inland dunes, peat bogs, and birch and pine forests take over the landscape. Lake and Dam of Gileppe. In 1867, the wool industry of Verviers needed water, a lot of water. The solution was to block the Gileppe River in the eastern Ardennes with a granite masonry dam. It was the first major dam ever built in modern Belgium, and to this day it covers 130 hectares, or about 320 acres of forest. At the top, a sandstone lion 44 feet, or 13.5 meters tall, watches over the reservoir, made of 183 blocks interlocked together. A panoramic tower 253 feet, or 77 meters tall, also allows visitors to see the reservoir from above. Freÿr Castle. The same family has called this castle home for roughly 20 generations, more precisely since 1410. Freÿr Castle stands on the bank of the Meuse River, squeezed between the water and a sheer rock, faced 328 feet, or 100 meters high on the opposite side. Originally a medieval fortress, it was destroyed in 1554 and rebuilt in the Mousson Renaissance style, meaning sober and crafted from local stone. The gardens, designed in 1760, cascade down in terraces toward the river. They are home to the oldest potted orange trees in Europe, brought here in the 18th century, and nearly 4 miles or 6 kilometers of hornbeam hedges trimmed into a labyrinth. Ostend. For centuries, it was a military town. Then in the 19th century, the Belgian royals decided it should become something else. It became an elegant seaside resort, modeled after Nice and Brighton. The long pier stretches out into the North Sea, and from there you can see the entire coast. In the marina, in front of the town hall, the Mercator is also docked. It is a three-masted sailing ship from 1932, built in Scotland, that in 41 voyages sailed every ocean before becoming a floating museum in 1964. Today, this city is among the most well-known seaside destinations in Belgium. Vallée du Rouge-Pensée Nature Reserve. Fagnes means peat bog. That is a waterlogged terrain where moss grows on layers of plant matter accumulated over millennia. Rouge-Pensée, instead, takes its name from the reddish color that the water takes on, filtered through this acidic soil. Wooden boardwalks cross the peat bog to avoid stepping on an ecosystem that takes hundreds of years to regenerate. Here the landscape alternates between open bogs and thick forests where birch trees and conifers surround small, dark ponds hidden among the trees. This is also the highest zone in Belgium, and we are above 600 meters, or about 1,970 feet. Viaduct over the Ruhr. 710 meters, or about 2,330 feet of concrete, suspended between two countries. This highway bridge crosses the valley of the Aar River exactly on the border between Belgium and Germany, near the village of Steinebroek. The national border runs through the middle of the bridge, and you enter one country and leave the other without even noticing. Below, the Ruhr Valley drops steeply through dense woods in the river, flowing narrow at the bottom. Concluding this visual journey through Belgium, we've traveled from the canals of Flanders to the forests of the Ardennes, exploring together not just places, but also traditions that make every corner of this land one of a kind. We hope that the images and stories shared here have enriched your knowledge and sparked the desire to personally explore the extraordinary variety of this country.